All right, my name is Jack Wiley, and welcome to my PowerPoint presentation on the formal analysis of Dallapiccola's Contrapunctus Secundus, uh, with a considerable amount of help from a reading by Jacqueline Ravensbergens. I butchered that, but that's fine. All right, let's go to present. So, topics to be covered. So first I'm going to start with a short biography of our composer. Then we're going to move on to a little review of 12-tone music and 12-tone matrices. And then a look at the rows used within this piece, and then how those lead to cadences, and how those cadences suggest a binary form for this piece. And then we're going to look at polarity in Secundus and axis of symmetry, and actually these also help suggest a binary form. And then we're going to look at the contour of the rows and maybe talk a little bit about what that might mean. All right, so let's talk about Luigi. Luigi Dallapiccola lived from 1904 to 1975. It's the guy over here on the top right of the screen, obviously. He lived through World War I and World War II. He was interned during World War I. And he saw some performances there that actually inspired him. He studied at the Florence Conservatory and later taught there. And he was most likely the first proponent for serialism in Italy, and definitely the first Italian composer of serialist music to gain any recognition from Italy. His particular style of serialism leaned heavily towards the tonal, which personally I enjoy. I'm not a big fan of those 12-tone pieces that are really atonal. And I made a couple Mario Brothers jokes down here. I had to. Don't take it against me. All right, first a bit of review about 12-tone music. Well, I want to say 12-tone music was conceived by Arnold Schoenberg in the early 1920s, after a long period of him trying to figure out a new way of organizing music so that it kind of threw tonality out the window. And he came up with this style of music where he comes up with a row of the 12 chromatic pitches, and he bases his piece upon that row. And the idea is that each of the 12 pitches is stated once before any of them can repeat, and the result is there's no tonal center. There's no one pitch has more weight in the piece than any other. And this over here is a 12-tone matrix. It essentially shows your original row and all possible permutations, transpositions, inversions of that row. And a 12-tone composer doesn't use every single row resultant in the matrix. For instance, Dallapiccola used 8 rows, and I've highlighted them here. We're going to talk about the binary form of this piece. So in the matrix here, I kind of annotated it so that the 4 rows from the beginning of the piece are in red, and the 4 rows from the end of the piece are in blue. So I want to say we will come to find through this presentation that Dallapiccola's use of tone rows was highly calculated, and I'm sure he did this because it resulted in some cool relationships and maybe a little bit of harmony and stuff. So now, this slide, we have this big crazy diagram up here on the right that shows the rows in the piece and how they're all interrelated and connected. But the relationships that we're going to be looking at here have mostly to do with the rows in voice 1 versus the rows in voice 2. That's the right hand and the left hand. So after taking a closer look, it is clear that Dallapiccola was very specific and systematic in constructing the row for this piece in a way that would result in a clear formal structure, and we're going to find that that's binary form. There are 2 sections, each containing 4 rows, 2 in the right hand and 2 in the left hand. So shown neatly in the table over here, the section A rows are literal complements of each other. And in this case, that means that the intervals that comprise the rows in the right hand were inverted to create the rows in the left hand. They're literal complements of each other. Similarly, in section B, the right hand and left hand rows are also related, but this time they're related by inversion and then transposition. We got Weird Al over here, feeling the way I'm feeling about this stuff. Okay. Oh yeah, I had this pop up. Now let's talk about some cool relationships that these rows result in. This slide is entitled Quasi-Cadences and Binary Form. There are a couple features of Secundus that are typical of great 12-tone compositions, specifically using well-established musical forms and norms that kind of gives the listeners something to latch on to. I think that early 12-tone composers were a little worried that their audiences would run screaming before they even gave the music a chance. So they used some well-known formal structures and ideas so that the audiences would have something to latch on to. For instance, Schoenberg, when he debuted this new style of music, he wrote a piano suite, and it was based on the Baroque dance suites, something that he knew his audiences would be well versed in, would be something that they could listen to and kind of feel like they're part of the club, so that the kind of jarring new pitch organization wouldn't turn them off right away. Okay, so Dallapiccola strongly suggests binary form through a clever use of his tone row. In fact, the final tetrachord of each tone row suggests a major 7th chord. And the tetrachord is the last 4 pitches of the row. So he uses this tetrachord to suggest a half cadence at the end of the A section. And I've put the diagram down here, a little bit of the music to show it. So in the left hand, the first tetrachord shows a major chord, kind of sounds like an A major chord, and then followed by in the right hand an E major chord. So that's kind of like a half cadence, and that happens directly in the middle of the piece. And then at the end of the piece, as shown by the other graph on the bottom right hand side, kind of reverses this, and we get a 5 chord that goes to a 1 chord, or a perfect cadence. So having a half cadence in the middle of the piece and a perfect cadence at the end really like solidifies that this is a binary form, kind of like something that Mozart would have written or something. Yeah, and these tonal kind of tetrachords that arise really underscore how I said earlier, his style of serialist writing kind of leaned towards the tonal, which I imagine audiences enjoyed. I know I did. So now we're going to talk about polarity in this piece of music. So centricity, the reading talks about, it's really just kind of trying to use 1 or 2 pitches that kind of anchor those around them. In class, we talked about the axes of symmetry, and that's what's going on here. And specifically, there are 2 axes of symmetry that have equal time in the piece, just like that binary form we're talking about. So yeah, the left hand and right hand are flipped over an axis of symmetry, creating the inversional canon that we hear. So to the right here of my text, I've kind of put some stuff from the reading showing how they found the axis of symmetry. And actually, they did it by finding the index number, or the sum of pitch classes between the left hand and the right hand. So in the first half of the piece, the sum of those is 0. And wouldn't you know, the index of symmetry goes right through 0. And then in the second half of the piece, the index number is different. So we get a different axis of symmetry, which goes through 3 and 9. And the 6 here corresponds to the transposition number here. It's inverted then transposed by 6 semitones. So yes, the 2 axes of symmetry corresponding to 2 sections further supports our analysis of this piece as a binary form. And now finally, let's look at the contour of the rows. This is kind of an afterthought, but I found it interesting. I kind of used a little shoddy little crayon thing in Google Drive to kind of outline the contour of these rows, and you can tell that these complementary rows are going in the complete, opposite direction of each other. They complement each other. And I wrote, the symmetrical contour of the rows is yet another factor that aids the listener. I think that if these rows didn't have such a clear contour, I don't think that we would hear this piece so clearly as a canon as we do. And I've just included the rows from the first half of the piece here, but if we looked at the rows from the second half, it would look just the same. So to wrap it up, in conclusion, Dallapiccola used a tone row that could result in a number of devices to organize this piece into a clear-cut inversional canon in binary form. These devices include rows that conclude with suggestions of tonal chords, that final tetrachord, that he then uses to suggest cadences, that supports the binary form theory, and just like the 2 sections with 2 distinct axes of symmetry. And then in order to aid the listener in hearing this as a canon, he constructed these rows with a clear contour, so it kind of helps you hear exactly what's going on here between the 2 hands. And yeah, that's it. That's my analysis of Luigi Dallapiccola's Contrapunctus Secundus. Thank you very much.